Good evening. Welcome to the Marcellus Central School District Board of Education Annual Budget Public Hearing for this evening, Tuesday, May 26, 2020. At this time, I would ask that everyone please join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Board of Education is required to appoint a permanent chairperson who will conduct the annual budget hearing and election. This year, due to the circumstances surrounding COVID-19, the district clerk will serve as the chairperson for the 2020 annual budget hearing and election. Be it resolved that the Board of Education approves the appointment of Anthony Sinaccio as permanent chairperson for the 2020 annual budget hearing and election. Do I have a motion? Please state your name.
Motion, Janine Lundrigan.
Do I have a second?
Second, Kelly Rossiter.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Do we have five?
4.
Opposed? Carried.
Yeah, she must have bounced out. There she is. All right, she's back in.
At this point in the agenda, Mr. Sinaccio will take over the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. McAuliffe. I'll begin by reading the minutes of the previous meeting. Mr. Thomas West, Board President, welcomed everyone at 7 p.m. and led the board and attendees in the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. West introduced Mayor John Curtin and explained that the board can appoint a permanent chairperson to conduct the annual meeting and election. The motion was made by Patty Sager and seconded by Janine Lundrigan that Mayor Curtin be appointed permanent chairperson for the annual budget hearing and election. The motion was carried. Mayor Curtin read the rules of conduct for the meeting. Mayor Curtin introduced the board, administrators, and board candidates. Michelle Brantner, Superintendent, and Anthony Sinaccio, School Business Administrator, reviewed details of the budget and propositions. Members of the audience were given an opportunity to comment and ask questions. Questions were posed by Walter Bird and Glenn Paradise. Mayor Curtin adjourned the meeting at 8:11 p.m. until May 21st, 2019. I'm now going to read the rules of conduct for the meeting. All remarks should be directed to the email address shown on your screen. Questions will be answered in the most appropriate order possible. Remarks should be courteous. Please do not allude to others by name. When submitting a question to the email address shown on your screen, please be sure to include your name and address to ensure minutes are accurate. Thank you. Now I'd like to move on to introduction of the board, administrators, and board candidates. I'll begin with the Board of Education. We have with us today Michael McAuliffe, President, Patricia Sager, Vice President, Michael Bristol, Janine Lundrigan, Kelly Rossiter, and Margie Venzel. And I'll read the list of administration for the district. Michelle Brantner, Superintendent of Schools, Jean Charlo, Assistant Superintendent, Anthony Sinaccio, Business Administrator, Kara Lux, Director of Special Education, Michael Free, Director of Athletics, Eric Hubbard, Director of STEAM and Innovation, Susan Stearns, Transportation Supervisor, Donna Rice, Food Service Director, Ryan Riefler, Director of Facilities, John Durkee, High School Principal, Janet O'Mara, DMS Principal, Robert Montgomery, KCH Principal, Katie Cook, Assistant Principal. And I'm sorry I neglected to mention that Thomas West Jr. has also been part of the Board of Education since, I believe, April. And finally, I list the Board of Education candidates. This year, there are 2 seats open. Those that are running for election would be Sean Eady, Michael Harvard, Christine Shea, and Margie Wenzel. We'll now move on to a review of the budget details and propositions. I'm now going to turn the meeting over to Michelle Brantner, where she'll begin with this year's budget information.
Thank you, Tony. We just wanted to start out with a few pictures that I guess they depict what we've been working on recently during this strange time of school closure due to COVID-19. But it also depicts kids, and they are the focus and the reason that we all do what we do. So I recently, probably Friday, posted a video to the budget page, and I started with defining some of the terms that we will use throughout talking about the budget. For those of you that may not be familiar with some of those terms or not have a great handle on what the definitions of those terms might be, we will make every effort this evening to weave some definitions and explanations in as we talk about the budget. So as we begin, the fast facts, as we call them, the Board of Education is proposing for a public vote of budget that totals $37,844,964. It includes relying on a level of appropriated fund balance. This is a bit of an oversimplification, but a good way to think about it is there's room that you build into a budget, and you do that because schools have unforeseen circumstances, no matter how good we are at estimating our expenses. And therefore, this amount of money is held in the event of those unforeseen circumstances, and then for all intents and purposes rolls forward and is used sort of as a beginning revenue source as we start the new year, July 1, which is the beginning of our fiscal year. So that amount is the amount that we have planned, and we've used that amount for quite a period of time at this point. We also will be using an amount of money for our New York State Teachers Retirement System payment. This is coming from a new reserve that's part of our retirement reserves, and we'll talk about those in more specific detail later. The term reserves means basically bank or savings accounts rather that a school district has, and each one of those accounts has specific criteria. So the New York State Teachers Retirement System reserve, you can pay for that retirement system expense out of that reserve only up to the amount of that bill in total. And this amount does not reflect our total bill. What it reflects is a portion of the increase for this year. So we're trying to mitigate some of the increase as there's ebbs and flows in the amount of money that we owe the teachers' retirement system from year to year. The next fast fact is that our tax levy increase that we'll be asking for is 1.97%. This is that 2% property tax levy cap that we've been living under for the past several years. And I'm sure you've heard me say it before, or maybe other people before me, that the way that we derive that property tax levy cap amount is through a multi-step formula, and 2% or the consumer price index is only one step in that formula, which is why it rarely equals exactly 2%. And you can see ours doesn't this year because of some of the other factors in the formula. We also, because we're complying with the property tax levy cap law, we will need a 50% simple majority to pass a budget. If you exceed the cap, then you must have a 60%. The last proposition on the ballot would be for bus purchases, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more specific detail in a little bit. So there's been a lot that sort of happened since we rolled forward a budget in January, and it's landed us in a situation where April 1st, when we received the latest aid run from the governor's office once his budget was set, it also came with a pandemic reduction. So this is a line on our aid run where an amount was subtracted, and that amount was derived to help New York State mitigate some of the budget issues that the whole state is experiencing, not to mention school districts. And so that put us in a position where we needed to start thinking about some cuts that we could make and still function. And so this represents that list of reductions that we're proposing as part of this budget. There is a part-time phys ed position. I do want to note as I'm talking about these that the dollar amounts that you see are actual budget figures, but they include salary and other things that we have to pay for that position. So it's not just a salary number. So it's a part-time phys ed position. We believe we'll be able to reduce 2 teaching assistants, although that really depends on the needs of our students in the coming year. We also will be reducing we have a position of K-6 science coordinator. That position will be going away, half-time mechanic, and we'll also be taking 3 of our bus runs and dispersing the students on those bus runs onto other routes so that we're sort of redistricting our pickup points to absorb 3 runs. That also is enabling us to reduce the number of buses that we're purchasing this year while still keeping on track for our bus replacement schedule that we've been working on for several years. Okay. So what are some of the other drivers in the 2021 budget? First and foremost, when we work on a capital project, we have to estimate interest rates until we have a lock-in number for our long-term bonding. So usually when you're doing a building project, you're working off of what's called bond anticipation notes, which is a short-term bonds, and they have typically pretty low interest rates. And the reason to use those bond anticipation notes is actually to save money on interest. And then when you can bond with your long-term bonds, which is similar to you having a mortgage at your home, we get locked into a rate. So now that we've been locked in on the high school renovation project, we're able to tighten our estimate numbers, and we're going to realize a savings of about $200,000 in interest from what was originally estimated, which is obviously very good news on the local share side. In addition, we have contractual increases for all of our different bargaining units and the staff in those bargaining units. This number is derived from taking those increases and then deleting out the folks and the positions that we will no longer have here. In addition, we have constant fluctuation in our BOCES instructional programs. One day we might think that we need fewer seats in BOCES programs, and tomorrow that number could change. So as of Tuesday, May 26th, we do have an increase in a need for a BOCES instructional program. We also have increases in our employee benefit costs. This includes health insurance and also teachers' retirement and employees' retirement system costs. And then we also have a decrease in contractual and supply costs. The largest portion of the decrease, it really relates to a tuition for a specialized program that we no longer need. That's really the largest share of that particular savings. So I'm going to turn you over to Tony Sinaccio for a couple of minutes, and he'll cover the next few slides.
Thanks, Michelle. So this is a slide that we show each year. And just need to share up front that this isn't an indication of how well or how poorly a district is run financially. There are a lot of factors that influence the tax rate that folks pay or is used to apply to calculate the property tax bill. And so in Marcellus, our rate tends to be on the lower side for districts in this region. And obviously we do a great job here financially running the district, but probably the biggest influencer of tax rates, in addition to what school districts spend and the programs that they offer, are the property values that exist in the school district. So in this case, I can say with a pretty high degree of certainty that the district that is whose tax rate is $33.54 has very little in the way of commercial property, and so that's going to tend to drive that tax rate up. Whereas the district on the lower end of the scale has very high property values, and so as you might imagine, probably has some vacation or lakefront property. So, so in this sense, Marcellus does a great job in terms of its tax rate and its finances. This just gives you a picture of what it looks like in the Onondaga County region. This next slide just shows what, in one column, what a 1% increase on the levy would net a district when they were to increase their taxes. And the far right-hand column, the proposed percent levy increase for 2021. This is an indicator of where a district is financially, but it's a snapshot of a moment in time. So in this case, for Marcellus in the 2021 school year, our levy increase is on the low end compared to other districts. Now, if we were to go back a year ago, it was the opposite situation. We were at the higher end because we had the impact of a building project that affected our tax levy limit. And so here you can see, as I said, we're at the lower end of the pack. Doesn't mean that those other districts aren't doing a great job. It just means they have other things that are affecting their levy increase. The biggest influencer for us this year, as Michelle had mentioned a couple of slides ago, is that our debt service is lower than we had expected. And so last year at this time, just the way the calculation worked, we had to ask the taxpayers for an increase to pay for the building project, because those actual costs ended up being lower than our estimated costs at the time, where our levy increase would not be as high as other districts. This is a required presentation for our budget, where we have to break our budget down into three components: the administrative component, program, and capital. The administrative component, as you can imagine, has all of our administrative costs. There are other pieces and parts in here that a person might not think of, related specifically to BOCES administrative costs, to the Board of Education, to legal services. There are all sorts of pieces and parts that are in the administrative component. And so you can see here that our administrative budget is about 8.5% of our overall budget. That tends to be on the low end across the state. Administratively, as a portion of our budget, we tend to be on the lower end of districts in Central New York and throughout the state. Program, as you can imagine, is the instructional component of our budget. You should and would expect that would be the largest component. And in here, all of our teaching services and library, nurses, transportation is actually factored in as part of our program budget. And a great majority of our BOCES programs are found here. And then finally is the capital component. This includes debt service, our facilities maintenance programs, and purchase of buses and things of that nature. So this is a pretty simple picture of the school budget, broken down into the three required components. This next slide just gives you a general overview of our revenue sources. So we have state aid, real property taxes, and then other sources. And state aid is, of course, the component that fluctuates heavily from year to year and is pretty much beyond our control, with the exception of a few expense-driven aid categories. But you'll see that there is a decrease here, and we're living with what the state has given us. We're playing with the cards that have been dealt. It's not a great situation. We're hoping it doesn't get worse, but in any case, we've built the budget based on what information has been provided to us by the state. Second is real property taxes, again reflecting an increase of 1.97% from the 2019-20 school year. And then other sources. So you can see there's relatively little change here. There is a reduction in interest income that we had to factor in for next school year of about $150,000. That's actually offset by the let's see, that's actually offset by the revenue that's related to a tuition expense that Michelle had also mentioned earlier. So long story short, there are very little in the way of additional income in that category. And finally, I'm going to share with you just a picture of what the impact would be on a person's home. These are estimates, and so we indicate towards the bottom here that this assumes that rates of equalization remain the same. they will change. In fact, I was looking at this information this past weekend, and it looks as though equalization rates are going to decrease. And unfortunately, that causes swings in different towns. But the number that we like to pay attention to is at the top, the estimated tax on true for 1920 versus the actual on true. So you can see that our actual on true is actually about $1 per thousand lower than was estimated. And so we don't make any assumptions when we give folks an estimate of what the impact would be on their tax bill. And so the actual rate ended up being quite a bit lower. That there are two factors there. One is, there actually is one factor, and that is property values. So if our property values on true increase, then that has I guess I would call it a positive impact on our tax rate, where it would cause it to go down. So that's exactly what happened between the time we estimated and the actual rates were calculated. So we have here the estimate on a $100,000 home. So this isn't going to be precise, but approximately for a person who has the average or the standard star exemption, we're expecting the impact on their tax bill to be roughly $32. So if you have a $200,000 home, then just for estimating purposes, you can double that so that the impact for you would be around $64. If you have a $300,000 home, then you can triple it and it would be roughly $100. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle so she can share with you a few other details.
So school districts have generally two opportunities to garner support from their community for a school budget. And in the event that they are unable to garner that support, there is something called a contingency budget that can be put in place so that schools can continue to function and meet the needs of students, but there are certain stipulations with contingency budget. So here you can see what the estimated contingency budget amount would be. That's a can't expend more than this amount number. And what we would have to do to get down to that number would be any non-contingent equipment would have to be removed. So meaning if we're not in a dire emergency, that equipment could be, kicked down the road in terms of when we purchase it. And then most of our employees belong to bargaining units, but anyone who is not in a bargaining unit, any of their salary increases would not be occurring. In addition, you can see that the total amount we would have to reduce from our current proposed budget would be $62,803. And, things have changed with the COVID-19 changes that the governor has made through executive order, in that there will only be one budget vote, whereas usually we can make changes to the budget and put it back up in front of the community. So in the event that our budget's defeated, then we would automatically be going to contingency. So in the event that we did not use any additional reserves, we would obviously have to further reduce that number, because one of the other stipulations of contingency is a 0% property tax levy increase, not the 1.97% that we're proposing to support the budget. So this, we've been talking a little bit about reserves, and earlier I said that, the definition of a reserve is a savings account that a school has. And you can see the different categories that we have. The first three categories, those reserves are designated specifically to those areas. So unemployment insurance, for an example, we pay unemployment insurance. And in the event that we have an increase in our unemployment insurance and we wish to help mitigate the impact of that on the overall budget and, the tax levy, obviously, we can draw from this reserve to pay a portion of or that entire bill. I can tell you that we have a very small amount in that reserve and it would not cover our bill. So it would simply be a portion if we chose to use that. And the same would go for retirement contributions. This is a combination of employees' retirement system contributions and teacher retirement system contributions. In the event that we have fluctuations in those contribution rates, we are able to take some or all of the cost of that bill. It would be a very rare occasion that you would draw the full amount of any of your bills from a savings account. As you can imagine, not a good way to pay recurring bills. It's better to use it for one-time situations. The unappropriated and appropriated fund balance are also considered reserve amounts. Unappropriate is really the only sort of free source of cash that a district has. By law, we're able to keep up to 4% of the budget. And so you'll see that fluctuate. There's a couple of reasons it fluctuates. One, the 4% of the budget amount changes. And it also could be that some of that money had to be used, and therefore you drew down lower than having it be an amount of 4% of your budget. And then the last appropriated amount we talked about earlier, that's the play that you have in your budget that you roll forward as a cash flow. Quite frankly, as budgets get tighter, that cash flow amount going into July is helpful before we have state aid or any tax revenue given to us to actually pay bills. I also mentioned earlier that in addition to the budget itself, the other proposition on the ballot would be to replace one bus. It was going to be 3. We actually had that plan earlier in the year, and we rescinded that proposition and replaced it with the purchase of 1 bus rather than 3. And that's largely due to the fact that we are going to be eliminating 3 runs and combining runs to sort of redistrict. You might recall, and you might be saying, hey, where's the library proposition? The library proposition only goes on the ballot when they're asking for some sort of an increase, and they are not asking for an increase this year, so you will not see a proposition on our ballot for the public library. So our budget vote, we're going into this new era of virtual only. So the budget vote, although the official date is Tuesday, June 9th, that really means that ballots are due, because this will all be done via absentee ballot. Ballots are due Tuesday, June 9th by 5 p.m. That's something that's mandated by the governor via executive order. And that means if you show up to vote, you will not be able to do that. You can only show up to drop off a ballot, although you will be receiving ballots if you're a registered voter in the mail, and it will have a self-addressed stamped envelope for you to return it. Ballots will be mailed out this week. And as I said, it will be to all qualified voters. We are using the registered voter list. And so anyone else who needs a ballot and didn't receive one can certainly contact us, and we'll be happy to send one your way. We have 2 seats vacant for the Board of Education, and we do have 4 candidates running. This is the order that their names will appear on the ballot in alphabetical order. Again, this is a departure via the governor's executive order. It's usually done differently. And we have Sean Eady, Michael Harvard, Christine Shea, and incumbent Margaret Venzel. Just as a note, we actually had a question during a recent board meeting and have been able to put together a Meet the Candidates night. We're hoping that all 4 of our candidates will be able to join us, but obviously the timeline with the governor making sort of late breaking decisions on budget votes is quite condensed. Our KCH PTO and DMS PTA are going to sponsor this virtual event. It will happen next Tuesday, June 2nd at 6:30 p.m. And you can access it the same way that you access the board meetings, which is through our YouTube live channel. Just a reminder, in order to be a qualified voter in a district, you have to be a citizen of the US, be at least 18 years of age. You have to have resided in the school district as your primary residence for at least 30 days prior to the date of the budget vote, so 30 days prior to June 9th. And obviously, normally voting inspectors reserve the right to inspect a driver's license, but we won't be seeing you, so we'll be verifying that in other ways. And obviously, we want to thank you. We're very blessed to live in the community that we live in and to have the support that we do for our students and our programs. So we have had, at this point, no questions sent to our comments at marcellaschools.org. Just a couple of reminders that there will be a presentation of this exact slideshow posted probably later this week. And there's one with some of the same information and some different information already posted there. So I encourage you to check that out, and hopefully you'll get lots of great information from there.